It began during a time when I was hungry for progress but overwhelmed by the sheer weight of everything I wanted to learn. My bookshelf was a fortress of unopened guides, each promising mastery, and my desk was cluttered with notebooks full of half-finished attempts at new skills. I wanted to play guitar, learn coding, speak another language, understand business strategy, and somehow make sense of all of it in the little time I had between work and the responsibilities that seemed to swallow my days whole. The truth was, I didn't lack curiosity, I lacked method. My enthusiasm was a spark, but it kept burning out before I ever reached mastery. That was when I stumbled on the idea that felt almost like cheating. It wasn't in the form of some grand revelation, not at first. It was a quiet realization that the people who seemed to learn the fastest weren't necessarily more intelligent or even more disciplined than me. They were using shortcuts. Not shortcuts in the sense of cutting corners and losing quality, but shortcuts in how they approached the structure of learning itself. I realized I was doing what most people do, starting at page 1, moving carefully step by step, and expecting to build a house by laying bricks without ever seeing the blueprint. The cheat, I discovered, was to flip the order. Instead of starting at the ground level, I began with the peak. Ask myself, what is the end game? What is the thing I want to be able to do, not know in theory, but actually perform? So when I picked up the guitar again, I didn't start with scales or exercises or theory. I chose a single song, something I loved, something just barely out of my reach. It was clumsy at first, awkward and messy, but my focus was sharper than it had ever been. Every mistake I made became a teacher, and every little success felt like progress. Within weeks, I could play the song, imperfectly but with real shape and sound. And with that, my motivation doubled. The same principle worked when I tried to learn coding. Instead of drowning in abstract exercises and syntax drills, I picked a small project, something I actually wanted to build, even if it was ridiculously simple. I broke it down like a puzzle, searching for the missing pieces as I went along. When I needed syntax, I learned it. When I needed a concept, I looked it up. Each lesson stuck because it had a place, a purpose, and a context. The cheat, I realized, was context. Learning in isolation is like memorizing lines from a play without knowing the story. But when the lines belong to a scene you're acting in, they burn into memory almost naturally. Soon this approach became addictive. Languages, for instance, where I had always failed before, suddenly came alive when I picked conversations I wanted to have instead of grammar rules I didn't care about. I didn't aim to learn Spanish. I aimed to order food at a restaurant, to introduce myself to a stranger, to ask for directions without fumbling. Each of these micro-goals was a game, a level unlocked, and with each one the language became less of a foreign code and more of a living rhythm I could step into. People began asking me how I was learning so quickly, how I managed to juggle so many new skills without burning out. I would laugh and say it was a cheat, though not the kind you find on the back of a test paper. It was a cheat of focus, of knowing that the mountain looks less intimidating when you climb a trail instead of wandering aimlessly at the base. The trick was to skip the illusion that you needed to be ready before you started. You start first, then you figure it out as you go. The deeper I went, the more I saw how universal the cheat was. Cooking became less about learning cuisine and more about cooking one specific dish perfectly. Public speaking stopped being an abstract fear when I focused on delivering one short talk, rehearsing it until it felt like breathing. Each success created a foundation. Each small mastery gave me leverage to reach the next level. And soon the cycle of frustration that had haunted me, starting strong, giving up halfway, was broken. Looking back, I understand now why it felt like cheating. The traditional way of learning is slow, structured, and often disconnected from real life. It teaches patience but not momentum. My way, this classic cheat, was different. It gave me momentum first, which created patience later. Once I could see the results, I was more willing to fill in the gaps with the details I had skipped. And because those details now had a purpose, they stuck with me. It isn't a glamorous story, not one of sudden genius or miraculous talent. It is a story of reframing, of realizing that the fastest way to learn is not the most obvious. It is not starting at the beginning, but starting at the end and working backward. That was the cheat. And once I discovered it, I never looked at learning the same way again. It started the way so many of my attempts at learning had started before, with excitement that burned fast and died quickly. I would buy a course, a book, a set of lessons, or even just print out some notes, and I would sit at my desk, convinced that this time it would be different. This time I would see it through. But by the third or fourth week, maybe earlier, I would find the energy slipping away, the pages of the book turning slower, the notebook staying closed more often. It was the same cycle every time. Guitar lessons that ended after I learned 2 chords, coding tutorials abandoned after a handful of hello world exercises, language apps left unused after streaks of 2 weeks. I hated admitting it, but the truth was I was good at starting and terrible at finishing. And the more I failed, the more I came to believe that maybe I wasn't the kind of person who could learn big things. Maybe there were people who could sit for hours and grind through drills and lessons, but I wasn't one of them. The turning point was almost accidental. I remember sitting with my old guitar one night. It had been gathering dust in the corner for months, maybe years. I had promised myself I'd learn to play properly, but the scales and finger exercises always bored me before I could see any payoff. That night, for no real reason, I picked it up and decided I would try to play one song I loved, a song that had meant something to me since high school. I had no idea what I was doing, no structure, no teacher guiding me, just the song on my laptop and the determination to match the sounds. It was ugly at first. My fingers fumbled, the chords buzzed, and half the notes sounded wrong. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about learning guitar. I was just trying to make this one song happen. After an hour, I had figured out the rough shape of it. After 2 weeks, I could play it from start to finish, rough but recognizable. And when I strummed those last chords and actually heard the song come through my own hands, the satisfaction was so much greater than anything I had ever felt practicing scales. That was when I realized something. This was a cheat. A classic cheat. Instead of trudging through the front door of learning, I had broken in through the side window. And it worked. I began applying it everywhere. When I wanted to learn coding, I didn't sit through the endless intro lectures about data types and loops. I chose a tiny project, a basic to-do list app. Every time I hit a wall, I Googled just enough to climb over it. Variables made sense because I needed them to store tasks. Loops clicked because I needed them to display the list. Functions weren't abstract ideas. They were tools I used immediately. The lessons stuck because they weren't just lessons anymore. They were survival skills for my project. It was the same with languages. I had tried to learn Spanish before, memorizing verb conjugations that never seemed to stay in my head. This time, I asked myself, what do I actually want to say? I started with restaurant conversations, ordering food, asking for water, paying the bill. The first time I went to a Spanish restaurant and actually ordered without stumbling, I felt like I had conquered a mountain. It wasn't fluent, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive and it was real. I remember the looks people gave me when I told them about this method. Some thought it sounded lazy, like skipping steps. Others thought it was clever. But what mattered most was that it worked. Every small win gave me a taste of mastery, and that taste pulled me deeper. Suddenly, I wanted to learn the theory because I could see how it made my playing, coding, or speaking smoother. The boring parts became meaningful once they had a home. Of course, there were failures too. Not every attempt worked. When I tried to learn drawing by diving straight into portraits, the results were laughable. I had to backtrack, study shading and proportions, and fill in the gaps. But even then, starting with the thing I wanted, the portrait, kept me hungry. Every practice stroke felt connected to that bigger vision. The cheat wasn't about skipping work. I still had to put in hours, still had to make mistakes, still had to be patient. But instead of feeling like trudging through mud, it felt like climbing a mountain where every turn revealed a view. The work became play, the learning became discovery, and the results came faster than I had ever thought possible. Looking back now, I realized that what I had been doing before was waiting for permission to learn. I thought I had to build a perfect foundation before I could attempt anything meaningful. The cheat shattered that illusion. You don't wait until you're ready. You start with what you love, what excites you, what feels just out of reach, and you learn backward. It's strange to think how much that one shift changed me. Today, when I face something new, I don't feel overwhelmed anymore. I don't think about the 1,000 steps between me and mastery. I just think about the first thing I want to do, the song, the app, the conversation, the dish, and I go for it. The rest unfolds along the way. It really does feel like cheating sometimes because while others are grinding through the slow path, I'm already stumbling my way into results. But it isn't unfair. It's just the realization that the fastest way to learn anything is to start at the end and work your way back. And once I discovered that, the world opened up in ways I never imagined possible. For most of my life, I thought learning was a mountain meant for other people to climb. I admired those who could sit down for hours with their textbooks, or practice scales on the piano until their fingers bled, or memorize entire lists of vocabulary without losing patience. I wasn't like that. I wanted to be good at everything, languages, music, programming, even cooking, but I never seemed to get far. My pattern was predictable. I would begin with fire, with energy, with the conviction that this time I'd see it through. I'd spend money on books, sign up for classes, download apps, and dive in. And then, weeks later, the books would sit untouched. The apps would gather dust on my phone. The fire would die out, replaced by guilt and frustration. I just don't have the discipline, I told myself. Maybe I wasn't wired for it. The breaking point came one rainy evening when I was staring at my old guitar. I had bought it years earlier, convinced I would learn to play like the musicians I admired. But all I had to show for it were calluses that faded as quickly as they formed. I knew a couple of chords, but nothing that sounded like real music. Still, for some reason that night, I picked it up. Instead of starting with scales or drills, I did something different. I pulled up a video of a song I loved, something I'd listened to in my teenage years, something that carried memories of long bus rides and late-night dreams. It wasn't an easy song. In fact, it was a terrible choice for a beginner. But I decided I didn't care. I wanted that song. The first hour was awful. My fingers buzzed against the strings. The sound was harsh and broken, and my hand cramped from trying to shape chords that refused to cooperate. But something strange happened. I didn't quit. Because every time I stumbled, I could hear the real song in my head, and I was chasing it. The mistakes weren't proof of failure. They were markers on the trail. 2 weeks later, after countless clumsy attempts, I played it all the way through. It wasn't pretty, but it was recognizable. And when I strummed the final chord and heard the song emerge from my own hands, something lit up inside me. For the first time, learning felt alive. That was when the cheat revealed itself to me. I had skipped the traditional path, the slow grind through theory and exercises, and jumped straight to the destination. It was like starting a puzzle with the picture already in front of me. I hadn't climbed from the bottom of the mountain. I had started halfway up and worked backward. From then on, I tested this method everywhere. When I decided to learn coding, I ignored the endless beginner tutorials about variables and loops. Instead, I asked myself, what's the smallest project I actually want to build? The answer was simple, a to-do list app. So I began, stumbling through the logic, Googling every error message, breaking things and fixing them again. Variables weren't abstract lessons anymore. They were the containers holding my tasks. Loops weren't mysterious. They were the tool to print my list. It was messy, frustrating, and exhilarating. And when the program finally worked, I felt the same thrill I had felt strumming my first song. Languages became my next experiment. I had tried Spanish before and failed. I remembered sitting with conjugation charts, trying to memorize verbs like hablar and comer in all their forms, my brain numb with repetition. This time I asked a different question. What do I actually want to say? I picked one scene, ordering food at a restaurant. I learned just enough words and phrases to play out that scenario. A few weeks later, when I walked into a small Spanish cafe and managed to order my meal in Spanish, the waiter smiled and replied naturally. I didn't catch everything, but I caught enough. I walked out of that cafe feeling like I had cracked a secret code. Of course, not everything worked so smoothly. When I tried drawing by diving straight into portraits, the results were almost comical. The faces I sketched looked like melting wax figures, with lopsided eyes and noses in the wrong place. I laughed at myself, then realized I needed to backtrack, study proportions, practice shading, understand form. But even then, because I had a picture in my head of the kind of portrait I wanted to draw, those exercises weren't meaningless. They were steps toward a vision. The cheat didn't eliminate effort. If anything, it demanded more of it. But the effort felt different. It wasn't dry or forced. It was urgent, purposeful, tied directly to the thing I cared about. Instead of trudging through theory and waiting for the day I could finally use it, I was using it from the start. The theory became seasoning, not the main dish. People sometimes ask me if I was just cutting corners. I would smile and shake my head. No, I was building corners first, then filling in the walls. It felt like the opposite of school. In school, we're told to start from the ground up, memorize rules and principles before we can apply them. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. You throw yourself in, messy and unprepared, and you learn because you must. My cheat was simply to replicate that, start at the end, then work backward. And slowly, it rewired me. The person who once doubted they could stick with anything began to believe they could learn anything. The mountain that once loomed over me no longer seemed impossible. I wasn't afraid of it anymore because I had a rope, a shortcut, a way to climb that worked for me. Today, when I think about learning something new, I don't ask, where do I begin? I ask, what's the first thing I want to do? Then I dive in. And the strangest part? Once I began seeing results, once I reached those small victories, I wanted the theory too. I wanted the scales, the grammar rules, the fundamentals, because now they meant something. They were no longer abstract. They were tools sharpening a skill I already loved. It may not sound like much, but for me, discovering that classic cheat didn't just help me learn faster. It changed the way I thought about myself. It made me realize that learning isn't about grinding through steps in the right order. It's about lighting a spark and feeding it just enough to keep it burning. And once you learn how to do that, the world opens up in ways you never thought possible.